Hi, everyone. Hi, Daniel.
Hi.
So welcome everybody to our TESOL Spring 2023 webinar. Today is Monday, June 26th, and the title of our webinar is Making the Implicit Explicit, Teaching the Hidden Curriculum in the Adult Ed Classroom. My name is Michelle Chan, and
I am Daniel Chavez.
we are both instructors at Briya Public Charter School in Washington, D.C. So a little bit about myself. My name is Michelle again. I received my master's in TESOL from American University in Washington, D.C. My teaching background includes a variety of contexts, community colleges, intensive English programs, bridge programs. I've taught abroad as a Peace Corps volunteer in Jordan. And currently I am an adult ed instructor with Briya Public Charter School.
All right. And my name is Daniel. I hold a master's in English language teaching from Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland. I've experienced working with community centers and other nonprofit teaching organizations, with private language schools, and my area of research and experience has been in working with asylum seekers, migrants, and other economically disadvantaged populations. Currently, I'm also an adult education lead instructor at Briya Public Charter School in Washington, D.C.
All right. So in terms of our teaching context, who we serve, our student demographic, we both taught basic level English this past year. Our program runs from low literacy to basic to intermediate to advanced. Our students include those with limited or interrupted formal education, also known as SLIFE. And these are students with low literacy in their L1 or very little formal education in their home country. So they might have only received up to grade 3, for example, in their own country of education. The majority of our students are Spanish speakers. Other common languages include French, Amharic, Tigrinya, and Arabic. Our students include new Americans to longtime residents of the United States. And in terms of student objectives, they come to take our classes for a variety of reasons. But for the most part, our students are parents whose children up to pre-K are enrolled in the school in the same building. And so our students learn English that applies to supporting their children's growth and education. So one of their goals is to effectively communicate with their children's teachers. Many of our students also take our classes to gain entry-level employment, to prepare to seek certification in high-demand careers, such as becoming a child development associate or a medical assistant. And some of our higher level students also take our classes to complete the NEDP, which is the National External Diploma Program, where they can earn a high school diploma and enter higher education. Okay, Daniel.
Okay, so in our classes in teaching basic level English, we focus on teaching literacy skills such as alphabetics and phonics. We also teach digital literacy through our program. We focus on all kinds of life skills, such as topics can include work or family or communities. We focus on helping students navigating the world in which they live. Could be talking to doctors or to teachers or many other situations such as that. We do what we teach so that our students can develop the skills to support the needs of their children, many of whom are in the public school system and some of whom are enrolled in classes are in our own school, as Michelle was saying. Our curriculum is informed by CASAS. We use that to help monitor our students' progress and as a to help test and assess their levels all throughout from basic through advanced. Some other things to keep in mind about the nature of our curriculum. We are a hybrid model, so students take classes 2 days in person and 2 days virtually. And we have a attendance policy where students are required to attend class every day, where they can miss only a certain number of courses per month before in order to maintain participation in the class. We also don't assign homework in our classes. Our students are expected to complete the work during class hours, whether that's at home or in person in school. The mission of our organization, of Briya Public Charter School, is to strengthen families through culturally responsive two-generation education. We believe that parents are their children's first and most important teachers, and everything we do is to help improve not only literacy for themselves, but also for their children and get the best possible results. However, while our mission focuses on teaching, one thing that we have noticed is that we don't necessarily answer the question of how we teach our participants to learn. How do we teach our participants to become students? Relatedly, we ask ourselves, how do we help our students develop the skills that they need in order to succeed in the classroom? These are some of the unanswered questions that have laid the foundation for our work here today and thinking about in investigating our own teaching. So before we go any further, we'd like to take a few minutes here for you to stop the recording and to think about what it means to be a good student. Thinking in terms of your own classroom, how do you identify the kind of behaviors and traits that help you decide who are the quote unquote good students in your classes? Who's best positioned to succeed and to make the most gains and progress in their English learning journey? There's no right or wrong answer here. This is an open-ended question. Just please take a few minutes to think about what it means to be a good student for you in your classroom.
All right. We hope you had a good time reflecting and marinating on that question of what makes a good student in your classroom. I can go ahead and share my own response to that question. Myself coming from an academic higher ed background and then transitioning to adult ed, it was a bit of a change in terms of my teaching context. And so I can recall at the beginning of the school year this past year, there was a moment where I asked my students to take out their handouts from the previous class, take out their pencils and notebooks, and kind of to my frustration, a lot of them were pulling out crumpled pieces of paper. Some students didn't have a pencil. Some didn't bring the notebook that I had just given them yesterday. And so that really just got me thinking. It did irk me to kind of find that my students were not as prepared as I expected, as I wanted them to be. And so because I follow the script for how students should behave when we start class, which is that you have to have your materials organized and ready, this contributed to my understanding of what makes a good student, that you demonstrate through your actions that you are ready to learn when you enter the classroom. And so for me, there was a bit of a disconnect between my expectations and what I was actually seeing among my students.
So as we confront these kinds of issues in our classroom, this raises the problem, or rather the challenge that we are seeking to address or to grapple with today in this webinar. In the first part, we thought through some of the challenges we face both in our own classes and in other classrooms within our school, especially with basic and other lower level students. We found among our students some of the challenges that the teachers face is students who don't bring the materials, the notebooks, the pens, the pencils, the laptops, what they need in class every day. Some students wouldn't adhere to attendance policies. Students would attend irregularly or would come early or leave late, or would otherwise not follow the attendance policies that we might expect. We saw a lot of cases of improper turn taking, students interrupting one another or the teacher, or not engaging in a back and forth conversational practice that we look for. Students who may have materials but may not be aware of them, may have them disorganized or forgotten in a corner somewhere. Other students may have limited autonomous learning. That is, they may not be taking advantage of opportunities to study outside of the class, whether with the materials we provide them or with their own materials they seek out. What these have in common is that they all have a kind of, they demonstrate a kind of unfamiliarity with what can be termed school-based decontextualized learning tasks. That is, tasks that are not related to the daily life of a student, but to a kind of task that's done in a vacuum, learning how to repeat sounds, to copy letters, kind of things that you might take for granted, but are a rather strange kind of task when compared with what most of our students need to do on a daily basis to succeed.
So in thinking about then what makes a good student and the challenges that are posed in the adult ed classroom, we wanted to ground our discussion in a bit of some literature. And so we wanted to look at the why these problems or challenges exist. So looking at the Capua, she states that students with limited or interrupted formal education feel bewildered, confused, and alienated, experiencing what Ibarra terms cultural dissonance, which is a mismatch between their ways of thinking, learning, understanding the world, and interacting with others, and those expected and assumed in US schools. And at the same time, she continues, teachers also feel baffled and disconcerted. These students do not fit their understanding of what secondary students should be capable of. So in other words, the Capua is saying that there is a misalignment between teacher expectations, whether implicit or explicit, and students' expectations within the classroom, the US classroom. If we dive deeper into this notion of expectations, then we can look at how author and literature professor James Miller examines and challenges us to reflect on the way that we respond or react in different situations through the concepts of norms and scripts. He states what happens when we begin looking at our daily actions and choices as if they were highly choreographed performances. What do we gain in sum by thinking about our world as a kind of stage on which we are encouraged to act out parts written for us in advance? So in other words, Miller asserts that every context has a set of rules, implicit and explicit, and when we know the rules or the script for how to behave, then we navigate that context with ease. We don't raise any flags, but when we lack the script or go off script, that is when the disconnect happens. So looking at three of Miller's points within the classroom setting, norms, script, and role, we can get a better sense of how instructors in a typical US classroom operate. A norm is a widely held cultural belief about what is appropriate in a given situation. So in the classroom, a norm might dictate, for example, with the amount of student talk versus teacher talk, wherein the belief is that the real learning takes place when there's more of the former and less of the teacher lecturing throughout the class period. A script is a set of behavioral instructions reinforced by norms and rules. In the classroom, it can include things like completing all the assignments according to their specifications, or speaking when invited by the teacher. And when a student performs these scripts, they are indicating awareness and acceptance of the rules that govern the classroom. Finally, role refers to how people act in relation to their standing or environment. In the classroom, you might say that learners are performing the role of a good student when they raise their hands before speaking, or turn in all their assignments on time. So if we look at this framework, that as we as instructors have in place, consciously or not, norms and scripts that we expect students to act out to succeed in our class, we can then start to reflect on the concept of what is termed the hidden curriculum that we all adopt as instructors when we are actually teaching in our classes.
So to address more this idea of the hidden curriculum is what can be thought of as the unspoken part of the curriculum. Just like in a regular curriculum, you tell your students what they're going to learn and when and how they'll be measured on it. Your hidden curriculum are the values, the behaviors, the norms that which a teacher may be using to judge their students and to create the expectations for their students, all implicitly. A teacher may not even be aware of what their own hidden curriculum is, but it's what guides them as they make the decisions about how they're going to react to their students in the classroom, what they're going to communicate with them. It's worthwhile to take time to stop and reflect upon this hidden curriculum. If it's something you simply allow to exist without acknowledging it, then you'll be missing out on the opportunity to review your own personal attitudes. That is, think about not just react to the way your students behave, but to reflect upon that, to decide to recognize why you react in certain ways, why you have the expectations that you do, and how it can affect how you approach the kind of challenges that we had listed earlier on in this webinar. So in order to avoid these kind of mismatches, the fact is when you have a certain implicit understanding of how students should behave and your students have a different one of how they should be acting at a certain point in the classroom, that mismatch can cause problems for the students or for the teachers. So in order to avoid these mismatches, or rather to prepare yourself to think about them ahead of time, it's worthwhile to take the time to uncover your own hidden curriculum, to think about what you're asking of your students and how and why. These kind of questions that might be raised that you might ask yourself might be, what do my students need to do in order to gain my approval, in order to gain a reaction from me as a teacher? How do they have to speak? How do they have to act? What do they have to do on a daily basis? What kind of behavior from your students do you reward? At what point do you say, yes, you got it, you're making progress? At what point do you reward their behavior with positive attention, with more detailed explanations, with helping them meet their needs in the classroom? And conversely, what kind of behavior do you ignore? What kind of behavior do you just treat as inappropriate or unhelpful, or something that you are not going to acknowledge positively?
And so we invite you to pause the video again and take a moment to reflect on this prompt. What is the hidden curriculum in your classroom? You might consider going back to the previous slide and looking at the prompting questions there. Or you can list the 3 values, behaviors, and norms that operate in your classroom. So please pause and reflect, and we will see you in just a little.
Okay, welcome back. Thanks for your work. So at this point, I hope you've had some time to think about and to analyze your own classroom and your own teaching when you come up with these values, behaviors, and norms. And to be clear, we're not looking at these as the correct answer or the final answer. Rather, we're just taking the time to describe what's already happening in our own classrooms. With this in mind, we here at Briya, we took some time among ourselves to think about our own classrooms, as well as to talk with other teachers in our school. And among all of us, we were able to think about our own hidden curriculum and our own expectations for our students. For example, among ourselves and the teachers in our school, we agree that one of the things we expect from our classroom is to treat it as a learning space that is different from the rest, from the outside of the learning space and time. We expect our students, when they're inside a classroom, to treat it as a new kind of space, one where they're expected to behave differently just from when they would in the break time or in the hallways or before or after the classroom. We value our students orienting towards the learning space. As teachers, we believe that good students need to be able or capable of independent study. Broadly speaking, our teachers expect that students will take the initiative to study on their own, both during class time, could be during asynchronous or synchronous learning time, as well as outside of the classroom using those independent materials. We've also observed that students in our classes are expected to follow in-class announcements, to be mindful of what's happening in the school outside of the classroom time. We expect our students to have their materials ready for class at the beginning of class, to come with the papers, the pencils, the notebooks, everything they need to participate in the class, and to use those materials to take notes, to write down new words, spelling, grammar notes as they're presented to them. We expect that students who are going to be successful are the students who are those who are taking notes actively during class, both for later reference and also to help them follow material as it's being presented to them. We expect that students will attend class regularly in compliance with the policies of our school, showing up at the start of class, staying all the way through, and informing their teachers on any days where they, for any reason, cannot attend the class. And generally, in our classrooms, among ourselves, among other teachers, we tend to prize the behavior of being an active, engaged member of the classroom. We implicitly assume that students who are being willing to raise their hands, to answer questions, to ask questions when they're not sure what's happening, that kind of active, engaged participation is something that we tend to view as something that a successful student is going to be do on a regular basis.
So what Daniel just went through is a broad list of what we value as instructors, most of us instructors at the basic level at Briya. Now we're going to go ahead and dive into some specific examples of exercises or activities where we help to implicitly teach these values to our students, meaning that we're not directly teaching them how to adopt these values, rather through certain tasks or exercises. So in teaching the hidden curriculum, the first point Daniel mentioned was about orienting our learners into our learning space. So when my students arrive in my classroom and class starts, they are expected to put on their student hat and get to work. So I have always in place on the board an exercise for them to complete. So here you see two examples. One where they have to correct the sentences by using correct capitalization in correct places and punctuation. Here's another example where they have to complete the questions with the proper WH question words. And here's another example where it's kind of open-ended. They have to look at an image and describe what they see using words or complete sentences. So taking a step back then, the implicit instruction that I hope my students adopt through these exercises is for them to develop a bit of student autonomy, that they take initiative and get right to work as they enter class, that they understand that there's a routine to start working right away as they enter our learning space, that conversation has to gradually orient be directed towards the classwork, the class activity. And I, through these exercises, I hope that my students would learn to refer to their notes, the notes that they take in class, to assist them if they're unable to answer some of these questions, or maybe rely on each other and complete the task together. We also value independent study in our basic level classes. Here are two examples. The one on the left is my example where I link on their Google Calendar resources for independent practice for outside of class. So in this case, we use Padlet, and students are taught how to access those games and activities outside of class hours. So for example, on the weekend.
Similarly, in my own classroom, I use a slightly different learning management system, using Google Classroom rather, but I have the same goal in that just like I tend to expect or believe that students who are able to direct their own study will be more successful, I create assignments using Google Classroom and showing ordered lists where students are given a single page that helps them realize what they're expected to complete today versus older material they can review on their own initiative, something that I design in order to demonstrate or give examples for my students of how they can be directing their own learning. Okay, moving on to this next part here, you can see an example of how one target behavior, that is being able to read and follow announcements to stay informed of what's happening in the school outside of the classroom hours. In order to convey that to my students, rather than simply lecturing about the importance of announcements or delivering them to my students at a certain time in class, instead I assign this behavior as a classwork assignment, requiring students to read and write down announcements so that in this way I'm able to implicitly convey to them the importance of following and being aware of activities outside of class hours by creating it as something that needs to be done during class time. Likewise, in order to convey the ideal of the importance of being prepared for class, I start every class off with an open question, asking them to talk together and to answer the question, what do you need for class today? And I have an in-class assignment that lists responses from students to that effect, and follow up with a pair speaking exercise where they ask one another of the materials they have in classroom. This is a chance for students to reflect upon their own behavior and connect the importance of having their materials in class every day by giving them an assignment or an activity where they reflect upon just how prepared they are in that day in question. For some more examples from other teachers in our school at different levels, one teacher, when talking about the importance of note-taking, highlighted how materials that she prepared for her students included color-coded lined paper, physical objects she could give to them at a certain point in class and tell them, here, this is what you'll be using to take notes, to practice writing words, to remember materials we have learned that day. And in this case, there were also specially prepared forms that created boxes to show students exactly how to write down a word, to translate it and use it in a sentence. And again, all of this here, the purpose of this activity is not something for its own sake, but rather to encourage students to realize the importance of being able to take notes. Likewise, it is important to take notes, but also to refer to them. So in this case, there are materials prepared that are organized reference sheets that students who are instructed to keep in their folder in a certain place so that they have something they can easily look back to when these kind of questions are asked later in the course. In another example, our school, as I stated earlier, requires daily attendance and requires all absences to be excused or communicated to the teacher ahead of time. Students who do not immediately follow up with their teacher are contacted directly on a regular basis by the end of every single day, so that students are always being made aware of that there is an expectation that they will communicate with their teacher and provide any possible explanation or rather they will simply be sure that the teacher is kept aware of any reasons they might have for not being in class. This is instead of doing, we make this instead of having any kind of reward or positive anything as a bonus for having good attendance, because our value here in the school is not that attendance is something that is above and beyond, but rather is a minimum that is expected. And again, by doing this kind of activity on a daily basis, we aim to instill the ideal that in our classroom, it is something that is expected that students will always communicate with their teacher and will be attending the minimum by participating and attending classes regularly.
And if I can add something, Daniel, that is, we're also stressing that attendance is linked to their success within their classrooms.
So with these different examples being shown of how we in our own classrooms and in our schools, we create certain activities in order to take these implicit hidden parts of our curriculum and make sure they're communicated to our students, not just by being told repeatedly, but by creating activities and creating a classroom where students are expected to demonstrate and to reflect upon these behaviors on a regular basis. So with this in mind, we'd like you to take some time now to, again, pause the video and start a short brainstorming exercise. First, try and think of at least 2 implicit aspects of your hidden curriculum. That is, what do you as a teacher expect from your students, not just in terms of the assignments to be completed, but what kind of norms do you expect them to follow? What kind of behaviors to demonstrate, and what kind of values to hold? Once you've identified at least 2 aspects of your hidden curriculum, take some time to brainstorm some more activities, some exercises. What can you do in your classroom to communicate these implicit parts of your curriculum and to teach them to your students in a way that is meaningful and that they will allow them to reflect upon and internalize the importance of the agreed upon aspects of your hidden curriculum that you will be sharing here with your class. So again, please take a few minutes, please pause the recording, think of at least 2 aspects of your hidden curriculum, and for each aspect, try and think of some activities or other ways that you can teach that to your students during class time.
All right, thank you very much for taking the time to reflect on the 2 questions posed here. We're going to go ahead and wrap up our webinar by looking at this question here. Why reflect on your hidden curriculum as instructors? Well, it helps to develop learner independence. What does that mean exactly? It means that your act of reflecting on your own hidden curriculum in the classroom will help promote student agency, which is the capacity of individuals to act independently and to make their own free choices. And this is where we want students to take initiative to take notes in the classroom, to understand the importance, for example, of taking notes, or the importance of organizing the handouts that you give them, to understand the value of doing that and how that connects to their success in your class. Your reflection is also tied to promoting self-efficacy among your students, which is one's belief in one's ability to succeed in specific situations or accomplish a task. With the proper tools, this belief is increased. So, for example, in Daniel's explanation of the importance of looking at announcements, then they have the awareness of being engaged with the school at large, for example, when they participate in events. And so that would help raise their belief in their own ability to succeed when they know that they have a community to rely on to be part of. And finally, your reflection will help promote student autonomy, which is a situation in which the learner is totally responsible for all the decisions concerned with his or her or their learning and the implementation of those decisions. This is where we want to help our students understand that they do have accountability in how they respond, the role that they play in your classroom, whether or not they choose to complete assignments, for example, and understanding that that contributes to their success. So in all, we believe that it is highly important as instructors for us to reflect on what we are implicitly teaching our students and to ensure that the tasks we assign have that quality to them so that we help our students succeed in however way possible. So thank you very much for listening to our webinar. Here is a list of sources and suggested readings for you to refer to if you're interested. But that is it for today. Thank you again. My name is Michelle, and
I'm Daniel. Thanks again so much for your attention, your participation in today's webinar.
bye.
Hi, everyone.